Hello again. Welcome to part 5 of building an electrical Revit panel family in Family Editor. In this part, we will be taking the clearance zone that we built in part 1 and 2 and nesting it into the panel part family that we created in our last episode, part 4. We will be using it in 2 instances, one for the front clearance zone and one for the top clearance zone. And the tricky part will be making sure we set all of the parameters to the parent family parameters. And so we'll go over that more in this episode. Let's get started. Okay, here is the family that we made in part 1 and 2. It's our clearance zone. But in this time, we don't want it to grow equal in both directions. We want it to grow from the wall. So we're going to shorten this up, attach it to the middle reference plane and padlock it, and delete this extra reference plane. Tie this instead of length, we're going to make it width. And then this one's actually going to be tied to length, but I don't like calling it length. I'm going to call it width instead. So I'm going to go to the family types and modify this parameter to say zone depth instead of length. Notice these are all instance parameters. So make sure you save your family. And now we're going to do the nesting part. So we're going to go in Load into Project and select our part panel and place it right here in front. So if you check your families item, you can drag and drop this family right here in front, just like you do in Project World, except look at me, I'm upside down, so we're just going to press the space bar twice, place it right here aligned with those reference planes. And right here is the power of nesting, so we're going to ensure that this only grows from one direction, and we're also going to map the instance parameters that were in this family to the parent family we have it nested into. So first, ensure that this is locked to the back. Also, you notice that I've locked the sides, but we're going to undo that later, so just ignore the padlocks on the 2 sides. We just want to make sure it's padlocked to the back. So when you click on the clearance zone family, in the properties on the right sidebar, or whatever sidebar you have, in the properties bar, you'll find the parameters we set up in the family if they're instance-based. So make sure they're instance-based. You can find them here easily. And there's a little button to the right you can find. So you'll see zone width, zone height, and we're going to click on zone depth. And we're going to add a parameter to this parent family and call it clearance zone depth, actually front clearance zone depth. And we're tying the zone depth of the nested family to this parameter. Make sure it's instance, and then press OK. So now that's mapped, and we can go to the family types and see this new parameter here. So the next thing we're going to do is set up the panel width, or actually the clearance zone width for the panel. We want the clearance zone to expand left and right from the center to match the width of the panel only if it's greater than 30 inches. So if it's less than 30 inches, we want the clearance zone to be 30 inches, but if it's more than 30 inches, we want the clearance zone to match the panel's width. So here we go. We're going to do that with some equations. So first, we're going to click on the clearance zone and move it to the right a bit, which undoes some of the aligning. We want to make sure it's aligned to the very center so that their 2 centers are aligned, and click that padlock. That way we know it's going to grow from the center. Now we're going to click the zone. We're going to go down to zone width, click that little button, map it to a new parameter in the parent. So we're going to add a parameter since we don't already have one. And we're going to call this front clearance zone width, or just front zone width. So now we have that parameter set up. It's mapped. You can see it with the equal sign. in the properties bar, we'll go to family types, and we're going to type our equation for the front zone width. So the equation looks like this. If the gear width is less than 30 inches, comma, we want it to be 30 inches. Otherwise, if it's not, then we want it to be gear width. Now, you want to make sure that you have the right capitalization, because Revit actually cares about capitalization. So it won't work if you don't have the right uppercase and lowercase. Check your lowercase. So I just realized that we typed this into the wrong parameter. We don't want this for zone depth. We actually want this for zone width. So now you can see it jumped, and we can flex our muscles, test this out. So let's type in gear width, because we always want it to follow the gear width. So we're going to do 1 foot, and there we go. It works. It's going to 30 inches, but now we do 4 feet, and it jumps to the panel's width. We'll type 2 inches, and there you go. The zone clearance is still 30 inches. So let's put it at a normal, realistic amount. We'll do 1 foot 8, and click apply, and there we go. We have a nice clearance zone that's 30 inches wide for a 1 foot 8 panel width. Next, we'll just set the clearance zone to a realistic depth, which is usually 3 feet. Sometimes it's 3 foot 6, but we'll leave the default as 3 feet. And next we need to take care of the height. So save your work, and let's check out a left elevation. So I discovered some problems in this family. I'm going to fast forward through them. You can see my troubleshooting. So I opened up the family of the clearance zone, and aside from the most important part, which is to padlock your geometry to the reference planes that are the same reference planes that your dimension is tied to. That's the most important part. There's also a few other items that we'll go over that I discovered are pretty important to make sure that this functions. So right here, I slow down. We'll show you that we actually tie it to that reference plane, the green line. Not the reference level, but that reference plane that I have clicked, reference plane. And that's set to a strong reference. The top, though, is not strong reference or weak reference. It's actually set to top. So as long as you have that set to top, make sure your dimension is dimensioned to those and tied to zone height. It should work. So I've done all the troubleshooting for you. Now you should get that slider. Once you overwrite the old version, load it into your project. Make sure you padlock it to the new reference plane in the nested parent family. And we'll go to family types to flex our muscles and make sure that this worked. So gear height, we're going to type in 2 inches. 2 feet, and the clearance zone follows it because we locked it to the same reference plane. So now we'll try 4 feet, and it jumps up. So that's great. Our clearance zone's following the same height as our panel. So let's look at this in wireframe so we can see the panel name that we made in a previous video through the clearance zone. And actually, let's take a look at this in a 3D view so you can see how it's partially transparent. So you can see that panel name parameter in blue through the transparent. We'll check out object styles. You can see clearance zone is a subcategory of electrical equipment. So you'll be able to turn it off separately with a check mark in VG. Next, let's check out a left elevation so that we can create the top clearance zone. So we're going to copy this nested family that we have and create another instance of this nested family for the top clearance zone. It's important to make sure that when you slide this, that you see that highlighted reference plane in order to lock it. Now let's go ahead and tile view. You can do that by typing WT on your keyboard. And I'm going to get rid of some of these windows that we don't need. There we go. So next we're going to take a look at this top clearance zone that we have that you can see in blue. And we're going to tie its parameters to the nested parent parameter. So let's click that little button under zone height and add parameter. We're going to call it top zone height and make sure it's an instance parameter. Click OK. And let's check out family types. And we'll try flexing our muscles here. Make sure you work. Top zone height, I'm going to set it for default 1 foot. Now that width is kind of weird, or depth I should say. One method that we can do is to set this zone depth up to its own parameter called top zone depth. Make sure it's an instance parameter. We'll go over a second way in a little bit. Go ahead and click OK. So now we can make this top zone depth equal to gear depth with an equation, and that'll make sure that the gear depth matches the panel depth, or matches the clearance depth. Let's also set the width, zone width. We want to make sure that is equal to the front zone width, so it follows that equation with the 30 inches we had previously. So we'll set it equal to front zone width. And let's go over a second way we can deal with the depth. So let's click zone depth and set it equal to gear depth. And that way we don't really need the extra complexity of this top zone depth. We can just actually remove it. No need for the equation. And now you're set. You can go ahead and save your project. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for our next episode and final part in this series where we finish off and nest our family we just completed in the final parent family. Thanks for watching.